Time to wake up the neighbors. Oh my God, I love it. You've seen them listed for around 20 grand, big Italian V8, Pininfarina curves, and an exhaust note that makes people forgive every reliability joke they've ever heard. The Maserati GranTurismo S looks like a bargain exotic, but what actually happens when you try to make one faster? That's the part nobody talks about. Sure, shares the same DNA with the Ferrari, but this version of the F136 engine, the 4.7 liter cross-plane crank V8, is the black sheep of the family. It sounds deeper, lazier, and meaner than its flat plane cousins, but it also means you're not bolting on Ferrari parts and magically gaining horsepower. The aftermarket for these cars is thin. You get an ECU tune, a pair of filters, and maybe an X-pipe, and that's about it. So when the owner came to us with a GranTurismo already wearing the Lorani X-pipe and wanted more for track use, we knew it would take some creativity. The plan? Redo the front section of the exhaust, fit megaphones, and see if these simple mods actually add up to the 50 horsepower gain the internet swears by. But here's the catch. We're not changing the rear section. So the question becomes, can the megaphones alone clean up what's been one of the hardest exhaust notes to get right? If you've ever wondered whether the Maserati bargain bin hides a real performer or just an expensive noise machine, by the end of this video, you'll have that answer. But make sure you hit the subscribe so we can afford more Italian experiments that may or may not anger the neighbors. Because today, we're finding out if the GranTurismo can finally sound as good as it looks, or if we'll end up proving why most people stop at the X-pipe. All right, so this isn't our usual exhaust build where we're doing for sound, Cody. This gentleman has a Lorani X-pipe, and you're probably not too familiar with the Maserati performance world, but there really isn't a ton of aftermarket stuff for these cars. The engines are a little bit different than the Ferrari V8. Supposedly, these are, the Ferraris are flat plane crank, so these aren't. And really all you have is exhaust, an ECU tune, and an intake filter, and that's it. That's all you can really do to these things. But apparently they respond fairly well to it. They leave some room once you deal with the most restrictive part in the exhaust setup, and being that this gentleman lives outside of regulation emissions area and said that he'll be using this for track purposes only. And the issues that I've had in the past with these, we've built full systems for him, and we can get them to sound pretty good. The problem though is when you start mixing and matching pieces. I don't like these X pipes for sound, the bisected blend ones, but he had money into it, he spent it on there, and he's just looking for pure power. I recommended against going with the rear mufflers, the stock mufflers, because it can create a funky tone, but again, he's just looking for power. So my thoughts are, we're gonna be redoing this front section. And the main thing is if we're redoing it and it's us, we might as well see what a set of megaphones going on there can do. But looking at it, you probably see exactly what I see right away if we're trying to get the megaphones flat in there. And why don't you tell me what you're looking at?
So right away, I'm noticing where there's a 3-volt flange in here, and it's kind of coming straight down. So if we put a 45 in there and try and get that coming, vertically straight down, we can put a 90 in here, kind of keep it as close as possible, giving us as much room as possible to fit in a megaphone, like right here. So with that, we'll just kind of 45 down, 90 over, and kind of keep this hole straight. Then from there, obviously we're gonna kind of turn in, and then turn back towards the rest of the exhaust going into his X-pipe. So it's pretty straightforward and pretty simple design.
Now, while this is pretty simple, one problem is we built systems on these cars before, so stepping up the pipe in this area, while it might give us a little bit additional flow, it creates some really weird acoustics in conjunction with the rear mufflers that are stock on this car. So we want to try to avoid that, even though the customer was told about this, it was warned, and we're going to do our best to try to maximize the tone. Although if we're not doing the rear, I don't really know how this is going to come up. So this isn't our usual guaranteed result exhaust system. We're simply going after how much power can we make on this vehicle in conjunction with the tune and the other mods. This is the F136. Now it came in a few different variants in various Maserati and Ferrari products. This version is the 4.7 liter. It is a 2016, meaning that it makes 454 horsepower. Now the earlier versions made about 424. And what they say the horsepower bump is using diamond-like coatings on various things like the camshaft and the rockers. At least that's what Maserati claims. Now, unfortunately, in the upgrade world, there isn't actually too much available to wring out very much power out of these things. A lot of people go for the X-pipe, ECU tune, air intake filter. There isn't really an intake kit, but what people do is they put these carbon fiber resonance tubes on here and they claim it makes 3 horsepower. I don't know why they just wouldn't get rid of it altogether, but these supposedly add up to another 50 horsepower, bringing the car up to possibly 500. I've seen even some wild claims about 600 horsepower, which of course I don't buy. But what I'd like to find out today is, do these little upgrades, such as deleting the resonance chambers, putting a higher flow air intake filter on there, and going with a race downpipe in combination with the X-pipe, the traditional mods for this car, end up netting something that you could believe would be 50 horsepower. So what we got to do, we got to get a baseline first, where the customer came in. And when I say baseline, this customer already had an X-pipe, so any power from there. Now, keep in mind the X-pipes that they offer out there typically are a better version of the X-pipe that came from factory. So I don't expect too much power with that, so I'm just gonna negate that. I wanna see where we go before we do the exhaust, and we're actually gonna play around using megaphones. Maybe we can net out that number, get it a little bit higher. But that being said, maybe it works in conjunction with the rest of the exhaust. But another thing is maybe it doesn't. Maybe it ends up sounding really raspy. In fact, a lot of the aftermarket systems just aren't my taste. Now here's the thing. This thing shares the same cross-plane crankshaft that the Alfa Romeo 8C shares, not the flat plane that the Ferraris share, meaning that should sound pretty good if you've ever heard these. I got to hear one in real life and they sound amazing, and I've always been chasing. In fact, we did a system a number of years ago that I think got pretty close, but I was still learning a lot of different things, and there's definitely some things I'd try now. However, this isn't that video. This video, we're just gonna see if the horsepower numbers add up to what the aftermarket claims. All right, so you want to see where this car is baselining, and admittedly, I'm having a little bit of trouble getting a smooth graph from this car. I've tried strapping it down a bunch of different ways, but it feels like it just keeps oscillating. But that's all right, because even if the graph is showing a wave, we just need it to mimic that once we strap it back down after the changes. Now, admittedly, the way I would go about this typically would be to do all of the changes, the downpipes and the intake filter in the ECU tune, but because this is YouTube, I want to show you guys the difference a tune would make before we go ahead and do the decat. So that's what we're gonna do. Now, I have something actually pretty interesting here. A little over 30 horsepower bump from just hitting the sport button, which is surprisingly, typically the sport button just changes the throttle. It might change a little bit of timing, but as you can see on this Maserati product, it's adding 30 horsepower over the regular driving position, which I think is pretty neat. I'll test that again. We're gonna throw the ECU tune on there and see what difference it makes before we let Cody tear into it. Before we start fabrication are these flanges here. Now, we don't know what the flanges are going to be before we get them off. As you can imagine, it's really hard to measure it with it up inside of the car for us to be able to guess the inner diameter, bolt circumference here, the bolt circle, all of that really needs to have these down on the ground. And once we do, we can kind of see if we've got something, because it looks like a simple 3-bolt flange. We can kind of see if there's something out there that kind of matches up where we don't have to do something ourselves. Now, just taking a look, the biggest flange we have here isn't quite enough. This is a 4-inch bolt circle, which I already know is going to be very tough to get cut. And because of that, we really have two options. Do we do something ourselves and cut them with a plasma cutter? We used to have a CNC, but then I'd have to have the file, have it put in there. Admittedly, we would want something faster, like a water jet, a laser cutter, or a CNC plasma table, something that could punch these out very quickly, which we don't. Well, actually, we do have access to. You guys might remember, I've met somebody who does his own crazy fabrications, and he might be able to help us out with this. Now, back in the day, we used to be able to do this stuff on our CNC, and even now, we would typically just run this on our plasma cutter, but I might have an idea of us getting this done a little bit faster and a little bit more efficiently, but I gotta take a ride to get there. It definitely pays to know people, and what we're doing right now is going to a familiar face for some of you guys. A gentleman who has brought us to a few shows, but we actually haven't done anything professionally together until I thought about getting this done, which is knocking out some flanges at a professional fabrication shop, T&L Fabrication, who admittedly does more industrial, but a little bit more one-off type of heavy-duty fabrication. But when I had asked about doing some flanges and various different thicknesses of materials we needed, he didn't seem to bat an eye. So let's go see how those turned out. How you doing?
Good, how you
Chad?
doing? Chad.
Good to meet you, Chad.
Nice to meet you.
Heard you knocked out some flanges for me.
Yeah. Well.
Oh, these look great. Probably gonna have a few more things for you guys. But this is definitely gonna help. We'd have to do these on a plasma before. I had a CNC, well, I have a CNC at one point, but the guys I kept around, I haven't really, didn't really learn the skills before they left. So kind of just sitting there collecting dust, but at the same time, you know, you knock these out pretty quick. It's gonna help out a bunch. So
yeah,
appreciate you get it done, man. And might have something coming up for you, more along the same lines, not too crazy, but just a touch more complicated than this. So
sounds good, whatever you need.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Thanks for coming by.
Man, the capabilities of what these guys could probably do here is really got my brain thinking, but I got to get these flanges back so that way we can get these on the car.
All right, so we're working on the driver's side right now, and we're gonna throw the Megaphone in as close as possible to the front of the engine. We had to do a new flange, a reducer from 3.5 down to 2.5, just because the collector used a 3.5 inch outlet for some reason. So we made that reducer. Now we're into 2.5, into a Megaphone, and we're gonna go back into this aftermarket X pipe. From this point, I got most of it tacked up. I got to tack the Megaphone to this S section. And once that's tacked up, I'm gonna tack the flange to the reducer, and everything should be solid at that point. Pull it down, weld everything up, and put it back in, and then move on to the passenger side. Do the same thing, essentially. Why doesn't it fit? Why don't you fit? All right, so we got the driver's side put in, installed, pretty much ready to go. It's bolted up. Just got to clamp this guy down, keep it loose for now. Moving on to the other side, we just have to redo everything that we did on this side. Make a 3.5 to 2.5 reducer, mount up one of the flanges, do a 90 into a Megaphone, go straight, and then kind of S over into the X pipe. Onto the swedger. Oh God, oh jeez. Once this came right up. This one's going to be 15-ish inches long. So it looks like we're gonna have to adjust one of these angles a little bit. When this comes in out of the Megaphone, we have like 2 degrees off on this side. And where I can kind of sneak that out of, it's probably in this bend right here. I can kind of back grind a little bit to kind of pull this in a little, making it line up a little better. So let's get this guy down and cut it apart and modify the angle. And looks like we're pretty good.
So what happened?
It broke. Trying to get it on. It just snapped one of the tacks. So basically, what I got to do is get this swedge welded and swedge more of it so that I have more room to push it back and slide the whole thing back further to slide it into place. So we're gonna pull this off. We're just gonna weld this guy up solid. I'm gonna swedge this whole area up a little bit bigger. That way we'll be able to slide it on, slide it over a little bit more, slide it back, be able to put it on correctly. All right, so I finally got this guy tacked in and re-swedged that side to make it fit a little better. We're up and I got the flange that needs to be tacked. So at this point, I'm gonna tack the flange in place, make sure everything is still good, pull it down, weld it, put the O2 bungs in it, and then it should be up for the last time.
All right, so admittedly, we've done a fair amount of Maserati with the 4.2, 4.7s in the past. And the one thing I know is that if you just go start cutting out exhaust components, you get some undesirable characteristics that I haven't really been a big fan of. Now, when we do the whole exhaust, I think we can get a pretty pleasant exhaust note out of it. I've always been inspired by the 8C that we once worked on a long time ago. I was really intrigued in how they got that note out of those cars, knowing what I know about these vehicles and working on them. So we were eventually able to kind of pay tribute to that system. And when this customer came in, really not looking for a full exhaust, I was a little bit apprehensive, but I did know we hadn't tried megaphones on it. Starting this thing up, it's not overbearing, it's not too crazy, it's not what I remember these things being, but honestly, I will say that it's most likely due to the fact that we did not tempt ourselves on going too big on the exhaust. We left it at 2.5, and that smaller diameter follows my 100 horsepower per inch rule that everybody fights me on, but it's not about horsepower, it's about sound characteristics as well. And I always get the dumbass comment about, I need a 9-inch exhaust for my 900. It's like, yeah, you do. If you calculate the whole distance of the exhaust, and that's the one thing no one ever puts into the calculators is the length of the exhaust, you will flow better at two 4.5-inch exhaust diameter for the length of that vehicle going all the way back to the rear end, which is what I say it's for. It's not for a 4-inch section or turbo pipe. It's for the whole length of the car. And this highlights that because technically 2.5, 500 horsepower, what we're shooting for, sounds pretty good. I'm pretty happy with this thing, at least cruising. If you just heard, I'm cruising. I don't have any hints of drone, which I was afraid of, which I've ran into in the past. But that's not why you guys are listening. What you're listening for is sport mode. And you want to know how it sounds when you downshift and lay into it. Pretty decent, pretty Italian still, very angry, a lot more depth than the Ferrari variants, but overall, I'd say it's a pretty decent job. Still got a few things left to do. We got to get this on the dyno, see what difference that these Megaphone downpipes have made, finish up the tune, and then we got to find out what the customer thinks about all this because, like I said, I'm pretty happy with that. This is just downpipes into the X pipe that was already there and nothing else. I think this is a different tone than just going straight pipes. This is very interesting to me that this thing sounds like this. So I want to see if it made big power gain differences. That's what I want to find out. Let's get it back. Let's get it on the dyno and find out what the truth is. So after tons of runs and a little bit of juggling for you guys there at home, so that way you guys can see what mods make the difference on the Maserati GranTurismo chassis, we have some numbers. 304 is where we started at hitting that support button. And keep in mind, all of these are gonna be hitting the support button. I showed you the difference is not hitting the support button, but the real magic seems to be when you hit that button, that's where the tune takes over, that's where the tune focuses. And what we got here, 312. Now that is the number of just our downpipes on the car. And what you'll notice here is our 304 number. We do make some healthy gains over here, and I don't think the peak number tells the full story because I cut it a little bit short. Had I not, with this oscillation, this car seems to oscillate laying down the power. Not much I can do about that. But I think we'd be a little bit higher, but it appears that we are dealing with a roughly 15 plus horsepower gain in the mid-range. Peak to peak, again, it's not exact here because I didn't follow it all the way to 7 grand. I cut it a little bit short on accident. Now, I did do a run with just the tune before we did the downpipes, 327, which is a pretty strong gain, 23 horsepower from just a tune on that car in sport mode. Now you'll probably be like, oh, but what about this dip down here? This was a canned tune, guys, not a full custom tune. Had I sent a few iterations back and forth, I probably could have smoothed that back out. Wasn't gonna spend the time on it because that tune's not staying on the car. Where I dialed it in was this guy here, 348. And what that ended up being is 44 wheel horsepower with the downpipes, the Megaphone downpipes, and the ECU tune, which is pretty strong. I mean, that's impressive that we're putting out that wheel horsepower. Probably a little bit more than I expected, to be honest. I was thinking we'd probably get maybe 35 wheel, and that'd have been strong. That'd have been impressive. But getting 44 wheel is actually quite good for a rear-wheel drive car in this year and this chassis. Again, my dyno reads low. You can come at me in the comments. I'm not changing anything. That's just the way it is. No correction factors on here, just what the dyno spits out. And this is pretty typical where I'd expect to see this car. I'm happy. Got to find out if the customer's happy. But that being said, I think the tune's all wrapped up.
Thanks, OJ and the crew, for playing with my Maserati. Excited to hear the exhaust and see what you did to it. I don't think it's gonna be your ordinary Maserati GranTurismo anymore, but I'm really looking forward to hearing it. I love the sound already. Does not sound stock at all. All right, time to wake up the neighbors. Awesome. Totally awesome. Oh my God, I love it. Dude, you guys killed it over here. Oh my God. This is not no little stock, little GranTurismo anymore. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Time for the reality check. On paper, these cars look like a screaming deal. And honestly, they kind of are. Italian styling, a hand-built V8, and the kind of presence that still makes people turn their heads and say, oh wow, Maserati, all for the price of a base model Camry. But that's where people stop thinking because yeah, it's a bargain, but also it's still a Maserati. You have to pay to play. On the dyno stock, this car made 304 wheel horsepower. With just test pipes, picked up a little, 312 at the wheels with bigger mid-range gains than the peak numbers show. Throw the tune in by itself, no test pipes, and it jumps to 327, but with both the tune and the test pipes together, we landed 348.9 wheel horsepower, 44 wheel horsepower naturally aspirated. So yes, there's progress, but not miracles. You're not turning this into a Ferrari killer. What you're doing is unlocking what Maserati hid behind heavy ECU and conservative tuning. And that's where the character comes alive. The tune makes it more responsive, fatter in the mid-range, increased rev limit, and the pops on overrun sound like they should have been there from factory. The car finally reacts like it's awake. And with the right exhaust setup, it even starts to sound like it's supposed to. That said, this exhaust wasn't exactly a guaranteed win. When we decided to redo the front section and test pipes, we knew it could have gone sideways, literally. These cars are picky about tone, and if you go too small or too short, the wrong section, and you'll get a sound that's, let's just say, not inspiring. Thankfully, the Megaphone saved the day. They cleaned up the tone, added exhaust gas velocity where it was needed, and gave it a deeper, more exotic growl without sounding like a cheap V8 swap. It's still distinctively Maserati, with some actual muscle behind it. But this is where it gets real. The market is tanked, which means these cars look like a steal, and they are, until you need something major like camshaft variators, suspension bushings, or one of the 18 electronic control modules that like to remind you it's Italian. And there's no off-the-shelf bolt-ons, no plug-and-play turbo kits. When something breaks, you're not calling AutoZone, you're calling Italy. And if getting walked by a full bolt-on Explorer ST ruins your week, this isn't the car for you. It never will be. You buy this for everything else it brings. The noise, the feel, the fact that it looks like money even when it's sitting still. This is presence on four wheels. So yeah, it's a lot of car for the money, but it's not a cheap car to own. To the wrong person, this platform is a trap, but to the right person, the one who appreciates the craftsmanship, the sound, and the absurdity of having a hand-built Italian V8 in the garage, it's a hidden gem. That's what makes the Maserati GranTurismo interesting. You don't buy one for draggy times or dyno clout. You buy one for the driving experience, for the way it feels when the throttle wakes up, the revs climb, and the soundtrack finally matches the badge. These mods didn't just make it faster, they made it more Maserati. So maybe it's not the smartest path to horsepower, but if you want a car that makes you feel something every time you turn on the key, this still is one of the best ways to buy that feeling without mortgaging your house. Building this Maserati reminded us something about car culture. Sometimes the best projects are the ones that catalogs forgot. You can't just order perfection in a box, and that's the fun of it. People who take on these cheap exotics usually find out quick that the car isn't broken, it's unfinished. So tell me in the comments, what would you fix first if you picked up a GranTurismo for 20 grand? Would you chase the tone or the numbers? Either way, you'll be hearing one before you see it coming. Stay loud, stay curious, and we'll catch you next time.